Thank you, Dennis. This is a project that was just completed, like, in fact, to be honest with you, I was doing edits on it last weekend. But it will be published within the next, I'd say 60 to 90 days, clearly before Christmas. There will be a session on this thing at the TRB, but you guys are getting a preview of it now. This was a project I think I mentioned. This one is very interesting. I've participated, I think I've done 13 NCHRP projects in the last 20 years. So I've done a lot of these things on various topics, not all of them fleet related. Some of these projects, like the other one, are very tool focused. I said that other one. The others are much more like a guidebook or a manual. This is much more strongly oriented towards the guidebook or manual thing, because this is more about processes. Even though there is a tool on this thing, but the tool it's much more simplistic. That other one's a very complex tool, I can tell you. And we got some other stories, some tools that are even more complex than it. And then in any case, this project, much more anecdotal, much more looking at things that you guys don't look at every day. And I'll also tell you, I don't remember from any particular results from the folks in this room, but a lot of DOTs at this point in time, and I'm emphasizing that right now, have a limited ability to do anything with this research other than understand what the potential is moving forward. Lots of DOTs, I think roughly about 25–30% of them, do not dispose of their own equipment. That they actually are bound by the legislature or by regulatory practice, whatever, that they have to turn it over to a general services agency in the state or something like that that's associated with equipment disposal. For you guys in that situation, your ability to use a lot of this information is limited. Even though, having said that, in some cases, even that when it goes to an agency, it's also highly variable. Do you get the results, or do you get the money back from those sales? Some states don't. If you don't get the money back and it's not part of it, guess what? You're probably not very interested in this thing unless you can change the game. Now, over time, the game can be changed, and it has been changed in states. They've changed the legislation. But then again, we're acknowledging that up front. Not every one of you can leverage this today, but if you can't leverage it today, just keep in mind that time moves on and things change. You just look around you. That's just the reality of it. So again, this was the project team. Again, Dennis and I worked on this together. You see a lot of the same names. We've worked well together as a team on these last few projects. You'll notice the project panel there I have identified. I don't think we have anyone in the room that was on the panel, do we? Didn't think so. But we also had a good panel. Well, Greg Hansen was on this panel, and of course, Greg actually gave us some really good feedback. He's never been shy to talk. He's sort of like me. So in any event, we're going to go through this tool. There are 2 modules, just like the previous one in the tool. But again, I'm emphasizing the fact that the previous project was 80% tool, 20% guide. This project's 80% guide, 20% tool. This tool is not something that's going to do handsprings for you. This is really, I'd call it mostly a good back of the envelope analysis to try to see whether this makes sense for you to try to get in to take advantage of some of the practices that we look at here. So here's an overview of the project. Again, I'm going to skip through these pretty quickly. This is what the panel defined as the objective. I'm not going to read it. You can see it for yourself. And again, this came through the NCHRP, through the AKR Authority Committee, as well as the AASHTO and the MAC. And this was funded a couple of years ago. This project took about 18 months. This is one of the quicker ones I've been involved in, and it was done over 2 phases. And again, it was a pretty smooth project. That we had a good panel, and that honestly, having a good panel that's engaged is really a tremendous asset to these engagements. Same as with the prior project. It's intended to be able to written so that you can target multiple audiences with the document, with the tool, because we know, again, just like that other thing, at some level or another, you're trying to use the information out of these reports to sell this thing. Because if you guys are wanting to do it, you're probably going to have to get somebody to get on board. That's your selling. So we're trying to give you the tools to help make that sale if you feel like it makes sense in your situation. And again, this is sort of why did they want to do this study? Well, I think there was a general feeling that you guys do a great job at buying equipment. I mean, that's a core competency for almost, I think, for every DOT I've ever been involved in. They do a really good job at buying equipment. Selling equipment or getting rid of equipment is not something that a lot of DOTs do, and very few do really well. It is not something that's, frankly, a core competency, and that's essentially what this project's about. How can we get better at this thing? And that was what it boils down to. As you can see in these bullets, there were, a lot of DOTs typically get, cents on the dollars. In lots of cases, they're selling stuff for scrap iron, and there's reasons for that. And we talk about it in this study. And again, there's some big caveats here, just like the last one that I'll point out that make it harder or easier to use the information here. Essentially, what you're doing is you're evaluating whether if we do something different, what kind of outcome can we expect? So that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to lay out, here's the different things you could do. Here's the qualifiers, here's the situations, here's the criteria that determine whether those options are viable, and here's what you could anticipate as an outcome if you're successful doing this. So that's what we're doing in this project. And to be honest with you, I think one of the biggest messages that we have, and I'm sort of jumping to the end, but it seems appropriate anyway, was that every day we watch commercials, right? If you have the television on, you watch a commercial. If you have the internet on, you're going to get an ad. Every one of those things that we see, somebody is targeting us. Someone is trying to sell us. The most important thing that these companies do is they try to understand their customers so they understand what will make them buy. That is the heart of this research, is that DOTs have done next to nothing, because it's not their core thing, and trying to understand who is it buying our equipment, why are they buying it, why are other people not buying it, why aren't they at the table? So this kind of research is at the heart of this whole thing, and you'll see that come out again. But then again, in this outreach, we actually did several things. We did another survey, just like we talked about before. This one was an actual web-based survey. We used one of the, what was the name of that daggone thing? SurveyMonkey. We used the SurveyMonkey. We asked the DOTs, we asked a number of municipalities, we even asked some private sector folks to fill out this survey, and we did a lot of analysis on this survey. This document's full of tables and weightings and all things and so forth, on and so forth. But we were really wanting to understand how the DOTs do it, what's the range of practice in here, and what are their results, what kind of results have they been getting. We also talked to other private entities or all over public sector entities. We talked to some general service agencies that are selling your equipment for you in some cases. We looked at some states that were doing some very interesting things, trade-in programs. That was one of the things that sort of jumped out at us, and I'll mention a couple that were doing what I consider to be some very best practice things in these areas where, in some cases, this was a way of working around the constraint that they had in their state where they couldn't sell themselves. So they figured out, hey, I can use a trade-in program and I can still take advantage of this. We'll talk about that a little bit. Guaranteed buybacks. I know the gentleman from Idaho, I've lost his name, but Steve was sort of one of the early leaders at Idaho on guaranteed buybacks. I don't think you guys have probably heard all about that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time unless you, in the Q&A, you want me to spend some more time elaborating on it. But the guaranteed buybacks, again, I'm sort of stealing some of my thunder. We found that to be the most effective program that anyone was able to use in terms of trying to get really good returns on their asset. The problem with a guaranteed buyback program is that it has to be, the heart of it is the dealer network and the dealer's confidence in their ability to resell that equipment at some point in the future. and it just depends on the market conditions and it depends on your dealers. So it's not something you can always rely on. Sometimes you can do these guaranteed buybacks and the programs work for years, and all of a sudden the dealer decides the market's down. I just don't have confidence enough to do it. So that's the problem with that. And again, I mentioned customer research is the number one issue that we saw across the board. No one really did very much work at trying to figure out how to target people. The other thing that we did, which was sort of interesting, was we used what was called a Delphi panel. You may remember from school back in, especially if you're my age, back in the dark ages, that the Oracle of Delphi, it's supposed to be a smart group of people you went and asked when you had a problem. Well, a Delphi panel is basically an approach where you're using what's called a double-blind approach, where the people that are participating on the panel don't know who else is participating on the panel and don't know who said what. So what you do is you go out and you ask them a couple of questions. You bring all that information back together, you distribute it, and ask the same people, based on the feedback that we got from these other people, do you feel like you should change your response to the previous one? Are you still sticking with what you had first, or do you think you ought to change your decision now that you've gotten this feedback? And the reason they don't know who they're getting the feedback from is if we're in this room right now, we're going to have a few folks like myself that are probably going to be big talkers and tend to influence some perceptions or a vote in that case. There's no ability to influence. You don't know who said what. So that's the whole idea behind this thing. It worked pretty well in this project. We actually had about half the panel were private sector folks that either ran rental companies or otherwise run private fleets. And when you're looking at some of the results in this document, we tried our best, the team did, to make sure that we pointed out in some cases some of the responses don't sound right for a DOT, and in that cases a lot of them were because they weren't DOT respondents. They were private sector respondents. They've got a different view of the world than you guys do, and they got different options and alternatives. So in any case, we used the Delphi panel. They talked about, like I say, they tended to use a lot of commercial options to get rid of their equipment. They also sold a lot from their facilities, and they did a lot of that sales on opportunity basis. Again, you've had a pressure or washer out on lease for a month. You say, hello, I need this thing, and I've already got this money I've invested in it. It's a good machine. What do you take to sell it to me? These rental companies, I'm sure you guys know, they'll sell it to you right there and give you a price on anything they own, anything on the yard. So they can make these opportunity-based sales. You think you guys, if somebody walked on the yard and said, I'll tell you what, I really could use that dump truck you got over there. What would you sell that to me for? That's not an option for you guys. That's just not realistic. You do not have the option to make opportunity-based sales. You do not have the option to do a number of things that these guys kind of do. But it's important to understand that these are people that does tend to be a core competency for you. And in terms of that, we also found out that they do emphasize trying to make sure they have good information, make minor repairs, demonstrate the equipment works. These are all lessons we heard through the surveys, through the interviews, through the Delphi panel results that led up to some of our conclusions. As I said, the private sector observations, I pulled this into a separate slide just to point out what some of the differences are between the rental companies and you guys. Opportunity-based sales. And the other two on the right, greater risk tolerance and stronger returns and rewards. This is I think it's pretty obvious to you guys. If you're in the private sector, you get rewarded if you make good decisions that make money for the company. I'm sure you guys are used to getting big bonuses every quarter, right? No, it don't work that way in the public sector, but in the private sector it does. You do a good job managing your sales, getting as much money you can out of your equipment, they'll line your pocket. They'll reward you for that. And because of that, they've got a much stronger tolerance of taking a risk. They will they will try to do a sale here, or they will try to do this, different things, because there's a stronger risk-reward tolerance in the private sector and rewards for those things. So again, that's the reason you have to be careful about taking lessons from the private sector and applying to you guys. So we were very conscious of that. Here's the key things that came out of this research. This is sort of your basic high-level brushes. Is that when you're selling your equipment or getting rid of it, the same supply and demand, most basic economic factor there is. It goes all the way back to to what was it, Wealth of Nations, and whoever the heck that guy's name was that I've lost for the moment. But basic supply and demand applies. If you can get more people to your sales, odds are you're going to get higher prices. If there's less equipment available for sale and you've got equipment for sale, you're going to get higher prices. If you don't have many buyers, your prices are probably going to be low. So that's a basic reality. I've already touched on that in the second bullet. I've already mentioned that DOTs really need to get a good understanding of their customers, their behaviors, and the practices that encourage them to buy. Then nobody in our research did any. I think there was a couple of small examples where they had done a little bit of work in this area, but in general, this was the weakest part of the whole disposal process. And there's a concept that we got into in this guide that I think it is very applicable and it's sort of intuitive if you think about it. The easier you make a sale, the easier it is to buy something, the more you tend to be willing to get people willing to pay for it. Let's think about what you guys do. If your agency requires the buyer to have cash or a cashier's check at the time of the sale, gives you 4 hours, 24 hours to get that thing off the lot. Don't allow, you don't start anything, you provide no maintenance records for it. That's a blind sale. You're buying a pig in a poke. If you're doing those things, there's not many people willing to take the risk of buying a lot of that equipment. That's one of the reasons that if that's the kind of terms that you're selling equipment, that's not very attractive. It's not very convenient for the buyer. It's very convenient for you, the seller, but it's not very convenient for the buyer. And that's something we apply in this discussion time and time again. The more you understand your buyer and the easier you make that transaction for that buyer, where you can either reduce risk or make it easier, the more likely it is the buyer will pay more money for your products. So if you're wanting to get more money out of your equipment, try to make it easier on those guys if you can. Again, I'm going to try to pick up the pace here a little bit, but this top one is one I think you folks will really agree with. That one of the biggest problems for most DOTs is that they have, through lack of funding, you end up running your equipment way past what time you would really like to be able to get rid of it. One of the things that if you don't have, if you have to run a piece of equipment that really you wanted to get rid of at 8 years and now it's 16 years old, is it doesn't run, it's in pieces, you're not going to get anything but scrap value out of it. And you can't, if you got $100 for a piece of an old plow laying there and you got double for it, what did you get? You got $200. You added $100. In other words, you're not moving the needle very much at that level when you're down at scrap metal value. If you're up there when the equipment's still worth $40,000, $50,000, and you can get a good pool of equipment because this thing's still got about a third of its life left on it, then your opportunity to leverage your prices and get good prices out of your equipment is better. But that problem, number one, is the one that tends to stop most DOTs, is they simply run equipment beyond what would be the optimal life cycle for them to have to be able to dispose of this equipment, and it's more often than not because you don't have the money to buy it. And honestly, our message here is, this is a message that in that prior project that you saw, 1308 and 1307 and 1306, I was on all those projects. That is a recurring message, that lack of funding forces you guys to make suboptimal decisions consistently, and that's one of the messages and one of the reasons this research is important. Get this stuff in front of your people and say, hey, you know, you're constantly, I'm sure, telling your guys, man, I need to replace this equipment. Well, we just don't have the money. You know, we're going to have to run what we got for another year. They need to understand that there's costs associated with that decision that make it not a good decision. And hopefully this research provides you the fodder to try to help you do those things. I mentioned already that DOTs typically haven't invested a lot of money trying to understand their buyers. I also just mentioned that the highest, I guess I inferred, I didn't come out and say it, but the highest potential for returns tends to be when the equipment still has a significant amount of operating life. And when I say significant, that's to make the capital cost acceptable to you. You're generally going to have to run it at least half of its life for it to make sense to try to flip it. I could just call disposal just flipping it. You're flipping your equipment, right? But it's hard to do that less than half of its life, but somewhere between a half and 3/4 tends to be sort of the sweet spot where it's still got enough life left in that asset that people are willing to pay decent money for it. And because that there's decent money available to pay for it, it can make it worth your while to invest some time and effort and money into trying to figure out how to market people and get more buyers to the table. And I could say that last bullet I think I've already sort of beat on already, but we'll return back to that. In this document, we sort of identify these as different alternatives sales channels. Like I say, the most common sales channel is the one I described, used for DOTs. Is if the DOTs that have the ability to sell their own equipment typically do it at an auction. And the terms are pretty close to what I described. But you've got all these other buyers that are potential. Some of them you already use, some of them you don't. But we talk in this document the pros and cons of each and what the characteristics are of each of these buyers. What motivates each group of this buyers to use this program? And what does that mean for you as a seller if you want to try to attract this buyer and improve the pool of sellers? Direct to public agency, this was one of those things a lot of, this is not in every state, but at least I'd say at least a good maybe 10% of the states have some requirement that says before we can sell this piece of equipment to the public, we have to offer it to other public agencies in the state. In lots of cases, the terms of that legislation even stipulates that it has to be at some nominal value. Well, if that nominal value, if the value you're selling at to the local fire department or the local towner, if it's below what that equipment's really worth on the market, that's a subsidy. You're subsidizing those guys. We point out that we don't want those people paying above market. That way they'd be subsidizing us, but the DOT wants to get what the vehicle's worth out of it. So when, this is an opportunity, if you've got that kind of requirement to sell to other public agencies, and hey, they're a customer, they're a potential customer, that you just need to make sure that that you are trying to get the actual value of the equipment, what it would be worth if you were selling it to another customer. And if your legislation won't allow you to do that, then work on that, because that's not a good business thing. Direct to the public. You're running a car lot for all intents and purposes. You're trying to sell it to people like me. Well, we do that, and I know I've talked with Jeff over the years at Utah. A lot of the old plow trucks, guys as a farmer, he needs to pull a float. He's got a backhoe or a couple of big tractors, and he needs something to pull a float around 2 or 3 times a year. So an old dump truck, even if it's in pretty rough shape, do that job pretty easy. So that's a direct to public consumer. You're already doing that in lots of cases with cars and pickup trucks especially. Those guys are tending to come to these options because at least they know you guys have done some level of maintenance on it. If you're buying something that there's no records on otherwise, you don't know if it's ever been touched. So the bottom line is direct to the public consumer. It's worth pointing out that in Utah, the General Service Agency has a lot that they sell to the public They allow the public to come on that lot, drive that vehicle around that lot. They show them all the maintenance records on that piece of equipment. So they run the closest I'm aware of. They man it. They got somebody that's running, 52 weeks a year. They got people out there manning their lot, selling this equipment. Now that's a model that would be pretty tough for DOTs to try to emulate, but it does point out that what one side of the, it's all about if you make it convenient. See, every one of those things were convenient, right? Didn't force the person to go out in the middle of nowhere to pick up this piece of equipment. Didn't force this person to have to come on a Saturday morning somewhere and have to go bring a cashier's check or go get money out of the bank. They even in some instances, you can even, I'm not sure if this is true at Utah or not, but heck, they might even be able to offer financing or whatever, at least have some kind of deal where here's the number. You can call us if you want to write it. Bottom line, direct to consumer is an option. Brokered sales is an interesting situation. I don't know if a single DOT does this, but the idea is that you have somebody representing you out there calling on companies and trying to sell them your equipment. Honestly, when we started this research, I knew they did this in the public sector. A lot of, especially like your big construction companies, will have brokers out there and they're trying to resell their equipment on these projects when the projects are wrapping up to other contractors, and they're using brokers for that. But I actually checked with a couple of procurement people from states, and they said it would be possible to use a brokered sale. You would just have to do it procure it competitively to where the person who was, they were making a proposal to serve as a broker. For you guys, it would be a little tough because they'd have to know exactly what piece of equipment, what pieces of equipment are available for sale, what kind of condition that equipment is in, because they got to be able to present it. But these brokers can offer extended warranties. They can offer financing. They can offer all these things that you guys can't. Just like the retail auctions are. They're a way to try to get from where you are to the Ritchie Brothers of the world kind of thing. So long and short of it, I've talked about auctions at DOT facilities. Internet auctions, there are some DOTs that use it exclusively. Most DOTs that use it in combination with their on-site auctions. So they'll take bids over the internet as well as on-site people. But it's that's another way to move it. Auction at the vendor facility, that's your Ritchie Brothers, where they actually come and pull it over. As I said, there's cost involved in that for the retailer if there's not a strong market there, if your equipment's not going to bring much at it. It's typically not attractive to those vendors to do it, to make that investment. But again, they can offer, they've got a hot dog stand. They can offer financing. They can offer extended warranty. They can do all those things with your equipment that you really are not in position of doing and trying to increase that. And I've already mentioned trade-in. I'm going to talk about that in a bit. And guaranteed buyback. I'm not going to say anything more about those. But these are the range of channels we talk about in this guide. This is all things that you potentially could do. Some cases not an option because of some reason, but this is options and alternatives to consider. As we talked, you've got these different buyer types. Each of them have their own characteristics and things that motivates them. A retail buyer, I mentioned, it's typically a home or a farm buyer. It's buying an old backhoe. They need to dig up a tree stump or need to lay down a culvert or water lines or something. They're typically looking to buy and hold. They're not in the business of selling. They're an end user. They tend to be a really good customer because their knowledge of the market is variable. Obviously, some of them are more knowledgeable than others, but that's a typical retail buyer that would be these. A dealer reseller, I don't need to define that. That's guys that are buying equipment for you that their only interest is flipping it. Their only interest is reselling. That's a target group. They have their own general contractors, businesses. The people who do construction that are looking for, they've got 3 trucks or 4 trucks, dump trucks in their fleet. They know that if any one of them is down, they're really in a world of hurt, so they're willing to buy equipment that's got a little bit of life left on it to serve as a spare. That's a potential seller. DOT contractors, this is a great market. These guys are working for your agency. They are trying to do the jobs that you guys are doing. your equipment, especially in cases of specialized equipment, a bridge snooper, a line striper, pothole patchers. These are people that are interested in your equipment and know that they're doing in a market where there's maybe not a whole lot of these equipment available. That's a really good market to be aware of. In fact, that's sort of those, there's the local state, that's the guys that are doing the pothole packaging. The multi-state national, that's the guys that are doing the line striping and bridge snoopers, where you're really trying to do it over more than one state. And then the international buyers, and I don't know if here in Wyoming you get a lot of that or not, but especially back a few years ago when we first went to, when the tier 1s and tier 2s, we were cycling them out of the fleet, there was a large number of international buyers that was buying this equipment and shipping it overseas. A lot of it went to South America, but some of it went to China and points beyond. But in other words, each of these folks have different reasons that they buy, and understanding what those reasons are and how to appeal to them is the trick to trying to maximize your equipment. Now, this is just a list of the things that we found from the surveys and from talking to people we consider to be best practice. And I'm going to ask you to notice these because I think it is important. This is something you can do today. You don't have to wait on anything. Make minor repairs to your asset. If they look bad, if you got a flat tire, if the battery's dead, if you got a cracked windshield. Now, I'm not saying rebuild a motor if you got a blown motor. That doesn't make sense. But putting a little air in the tire, fixing the flat, putting a new battery in the thing to show that you could start that sucker up. Just taking the ones with a low cost and high, what would you call it, perceived value that attract buyers. Do those things. We across the board, we found that people said that helped. Clean it up, spray up the dang pressure washer, get some of that mud off of it. Do what you can. You don't spend a bunch of money on it because you got to really decide whether you're going to have a good chance. But we did find that to be good information. Asset information. This was the area where it had the largest span difference in practices between the DOTs and other public sector agencies or other private entities. DOTs, for the most part, are allergic to giving their repair records on their equipment. I heard everything from, well, if the equipment, somebody gets killed in an accident and they've got the maintenance records, they're going to come back after us, to I'm sort of embarrassed that we do a lot of operator perform maintenance. We don't have good records on it. Well, I can tell you this much. If you don't have any records of what the work that's been done on that equipment, if buyer doesn't have access to it, he's just going to assume that there's nothing ever been done to it. So at least our surveys support the fact that no matter how spotty your maintenance records may or may not be, that information is worth money. That the buyers, that's a way of reducing their risk. It gives them some level of comfort that some minimum amount of work has been done on this machine to try to keep it in good shape. And that was a very strong message from this information. And like I said, the DOTs were on one side of the field and everybody else was on the other one. All the local governments, all the private sector says this is so important. This is money in the bank to have what work has been done on it. The auction process, it's as simple as that. Make it as convenient as you can. Try to do things that increase your buyers. Do a little marketing and so on and so forth. Let people know this is going on. Send emails to the people who bought from you previously. I mean, you got to put your sales hat on. It's as simple as that. Purchasing, as I said, a trade-in and guaranteed buyback are both what I'd call purchase-based options. Those are options for getting you rid of your equipment that rely on your core competency in buying equipment. And it tends to be some of your, let's face it, let's put it this way. If I could trade in my car, which I'm actually in sort of the car buying business or looking right now, if I thought I could get close to the same money to trade in as I could to sell it outright, I'm going to trade it in. Who really wants to deal with phone calls from yahoos that don't show up when they said they were going to, and so on and so forth? So if you can get, you can get a good value on that trade-in, Think of all the things you're saving. You don't have to deal with dragging it around or running the auctions and all those things. If it's close, I'd trade it in a New York Minute. But that's me. But the bottom line is that's a good thing. If you've got this buyback and you've got the ability to do all the things that support it, including the market, that's a wonderful option. And the market development is simply do things that I've talked about. Do things to market to understand your customers, to help try to build a program over time. For instance, I suspect that at least a couple of folks in this room have heard presentations from Alabama DOT about they probably got the best fleet disposal program in the business. It's also one that I don't know that another state could repeat in 1,000 years. What they did was like 20 years ago, they convinced the state legislature to sponsor a bill that said the fleet funds are off limits. Nobody can touch them. That it comes off the top of the DOT budget. And that they, as a result of that, they are trading their equipment like a private sector. They're flipping their pickups at 3-4 years. They're flipping their dump trucks at 6 years. They're flipping tractors at 4 or 5 years. Bottom line is they're keeping their fleet very new. Their drivers are, it actually helps attract employees. You got good equipment to work with. The shops, all they do are PMs. They really do not do any significant maintenance beyond PMs. So they've been able to reduce their fleet size because they got such a young fleet. They don't have the breakdowns and spares. And here's the funny part about it. They have built a complete program where they have the same sales at the same places every year. They market the local governments in the state of Alabama. They get top dollar from those local governments because they've got wonderful records on that equipment. They've gone through, they've cleaned it up. They actually use inmate labor to do some minor body repairs or to fix up obvious problems that's going to really hurt the thing. They put together a wonderful program. Like I say, I've heard it. I've had a half a dozen clients over the years say, well, how can we put together that Alabama problem? I said, well, it's real easy. Find a fleet manager whose uncle is a state senator. I bet you can get this thing in place because that's exactly what happened in Alabama. So, but anyway, the long and short of it is, it's just like, you can develop this market over time. Stan was at the MAC conference, and I asked him to talk about this a little bit. He said, I've been doing this for 40 years at DOT. He said, we put this program in 21 years ago. He said the first 2 to 3 years was a learning exercise for us. We really had to figure out what we needed to do to attract vendors. But he said, over time, we have tents set up. We have people bring these little wagons in where they can sell refreshments. He said, we make it very customer friendly to do this. He said, we keep the maintenance records. They're there for the car. If we don't have time to let them drive them or move it, show that they can move, we'll have a video of the thing moving. He said, we do everything we can to make this an attractive sale, and as the result, Stan's getting, he said he's getting pickups at 4 years that he's getting about 80% of what he paid for them at 4 or 5 years old. That's the reason he can flip them. So this is doable, but it just takes time and effort and honestly a commitment to a program. It's really hard to duplicate, but it is perfect that you can develop a market and you can do this. It's just tough for, like I said earlier, but for the reasons of funding and otherwise. I think I've said all I need to say about this. For the most part, you just need to know your customers, try to make it as friendly as you can to them. And this last point I haven't hit on, but one of the people on our team was a university professor, Lou Brown. He was my graduate school professor of marketing. But Lou commented, he said, marketing professors are always looking for projects for their students to do in class. He said, tell the DOTs that you want to get into the auction business or you want to try to improve your auctions and they need to try to talk to people and find out. He said, contact your local universities. Ask who their marketing professors are. Tell them that this is a project you'd like to have them do. He said, half of them are going to do it for nothing. He says, you throw a little bit of pocket change at them, a couple of $1,000 to let them go out and hire some students to go out and make phone calls. He said, I'll knock you down to do it. And he said you can get some really good information on your local market. You hired me to do it, I'll do it for you, but I'm going to tell you I'm not going to do it for that kind of money. So, and you're also going to get a guy that's not local. But the local universities, they're there. They know where you are. But anyway, that's the long and the short of it. It's hard for you guys to do this by yourself. Get you a little help at doing this, and you can, it is doable. I'm going to talk a little bit about that tool. Where am I on time, Dennis? Okay, I've gotten a little talkative as I tend to do. Talk about our tool here a little bit. As I said, this is a pretty simplistic tool. It consists of two modules. We got an asset disposal matrix module, and we got a disposal method calculator module. There are actually a lot of parallels with that 1308 model, except this is much less analytical. It's more of a back of the napkin exercise. The asset disposal matrix, the top one, it is designed to essentially you just fill out 3 or 4 little variables, and it tells you what type, based on the kind of equipment that you're looking at. And this is really designed to be used by like a fleet class, not an individual vehicle, because we're assuming, honestly, and we get into this in the report, the cost of trying to create a new channel in terms of times, effort, and whatnot is too much for you to just try to do it for a handful of pieces of equipment. You got to decide that you got enough equipment that you could make it fit this other market to make it worth your while. So what that really means typically is you look at 2 or 3 pieces of equipment, generally the ones you have the most of, and you examine them and see if it makes sense to try to explore some new sales channels. And if you do, then you can use the other equipment that fits that criteria. That model, basically, you put in a handful of little variables, and it will give you the pros and cons of this option is viable in this situation. Here's the pros and cons of each of these channels, whether it works in your situation. This is a very simple tool. Again, I'm not a fan of trying to give a presentation where I'm using the tool itself. It just gets too dicey, playing back and forth between these two things. But this is a very simple tool. It'll be available for download. You just put in, you see the input, you just put in 3 things. What kind of asset is this? What kind of condition is it in? And how much remaining life does it have? That's all that you need. And you're talking in general. If, like, for instance, the asset condition on a 3-year-old pickup versus the asset condition on a 6-year-old pickup or a 9-year-old pickup, what we're really talking about is we know that the older it is, the condition has changed with time. You're already taking that into account when you're telling the age of that stuff. Is it in generally pretty good condition, decent condition, below average, above average? That's all you're really going with that. There's just a handful of choices: below average, above average, good, bad, whatever. It's just very simple. And it tells you the advantages and disadvantages of each of these approaches. It is nothing more or less than a condensed version of the report. So it can tell you what we spend 100 pages going through the report telling you about how we got to here, and gets in a lot, some more detail, but this will give you 90% of what you're looking for on the back of an envelope in very few minutes. The other module is more quantitative, and it's just like the other one. It's a little tougher to use, but not a whole lot. Look at all you only have. The same, you got, 6 items that you got to fill in. What are you doing today? How are you getting rid of your equipment today? In most cases, it's going to be an auction. What is the value of that asset today? What is the value of that 8-year-old, the trucks that you're getting rid of or the equipment you're getting rid of that you're trying to put up for sale? Again, there's commercial sources can give you that information. You've got your prior audit result or sales results, etc. How much are you spending to dispose of that equipment? I mean, is it taking $5,000 a year on average, because that's how much time you're having to pay your people to come out on the weekends and run the auctions and so on? And then the total number of assets. That's one of the messages. Like I say, if you're only selling one thing, it's it's not worth your time and effort. You've got to have enough of these assets to make it worth your while, see if you're going to try to actually get some more money out of it. And then what's the other sense, based on that first thing, what do you think's the option that makes the most sense? We can go into a report talking about this. Nobody, as a practical matter, is going to really want to consider doing more than one alternative sales channel at any given time, simply because it's going to take too much work to put it into, and it also, you're going to have too many things going on to try to figure out what's working and what's not. So you're probably going to want to use one asset class. You want to try one disposal method, and you probably need to do it at least 3 to 5 years, just like I was talking about in Alabama, to have any idea of whether this is working or not. The first year, it's an experiment. The second year, you maybe get a little better. By the third year, so you're getting good at this stuff. You might see where it grows. And the bottom line is, based on those inputs, this thing will give you an actual dollar projection of what that alternate sales choice is likely to generate from you. How much money either you would lose because it's costing you more money than you're going to get in return, or gain that you're going to actually get more money than what it costs you to set up this stuff. Now this is a slide of this asset disposal matrix. That's those 3 inputs that I mentioned. I know you can't really see this thing, but the long and short of it, the key point is you only have 3 little things to pick out that I guarantee you, you don't have to look up nothing. You know this stuff off the top of your head. What kind of vehicles is it? What general condition is this equipment? And how much life has got left of it. If it's down at the 90, if it's got 10% of its life left, your potential is not going to be very high to make a lot of money of it. That's going back to that point, if you're selling it, if you're able to get it though, where it's got 30, 40% of its life left, there's probably, you can leverage this information to make money on it for your agency. And like I say, this is a very simple tool to run. The disposal method, that's what I just talked through. Got a few more things to do to fill out there, but honestly, it's also very simplistic. Not a whole lot of information to plug in there. I've already covered what those variables are. This is just simply showing you exactly what it looks like in the spreadsheet. This is a screenshot of the spreadsheet, so this is all you've got to figure out. I said earlier about cooking the books. This tool actually does also have the ability to cook books. We actually just have simply a tab that's got those choices and the factors involved in there. It's hidden, but it can be unhidden. So if you to adjust those choices, but we've spent a lot of time and effort in setting the default values. What we have said is we would encourage you not to mess with those values unless you hire a university professor or you get a consultant to come in there and do some research on which to make better decisions to reflect your local market, because local markets do change. Now, with that being said, that is the end of my presentation. I will simply say that we did not produce a video for this one yet, and I suspect at this point in the project we won't, but we do feel like this is much easier than the other tool to understand. And again, we would really encourage you to look at if nothing else, this PowerPoint deck will be available. We've also got, and I should have shown it, shouldn't. We also have got, what was that we called that thing, Dennis? We got a one-pager for an elevator talk. We got a one-pager so that you can hand this thing to your boss and say, this is something that come in NCHRP. I'd like to discuss it for you sometimes. And it sort of gives on one page, just front and back of one sheet of paper, what this research was about, what it was trying to achieve. And the idea is you give him that one pager on the elevator, you give him a couple of days, and then see, have you had a chance to look at it? Would you like, I can show you a presentation, I can give you the report. I think there's something in here for us that I'd like to talk with you. So it's a way, again, hey, this is about selling a product. We're talking about selling a process. So long and short of it is, we feel like we've got some really good information that you can use to help try to inform your other stakeholders. Now we're using all these marketing terms, see? So we're going to inform your stakeholders, show out what the potential is for these products, and actually have a really, we've got a fairly, I think it's 15-page implementation guide that goes through how how much budget we think it would take to do these things, how much time and effort we think it would take. And we actually, and this is the last thing I'm going to show you on this comes right out of that implementation plan. This is a self-evaluation thing. We tried to make this as simple as we could, because honestly, that is one of the problems with a lot of these projects. It gets so complex that it gets confusing. This is real simple. You're trying to decide, is there something here for me? Well, we're asking you 4 little questions, and this is what we said. This is, you can use whatever you want to methodology. This is just a back of the envelope way to assess your suitability to try to extrapolate it. Do you have sufficient fleet funding, replacement funding, to support your target equipment class? That's number one for the reason. That's the same thing was beating on. If your equipment is 5 years past its disposal date, you see we assign 20 points to that value right off the bat. If the answer is no, all you have to do is answer yes or no to 4 things, and it comes up with a score for you. So if the answer is yes, then you got 20 points from that. If the answer is no, well, shoot. I guess that's the reason I don't do these things live, isn't it? But all I did was copy this out of the book. I didn't actually even write the formulas in it. The bottom line is that it would give you 20 points for that. Do you control how your fleet assets are disposed? Again, that was going back to the earlier comment. If another agency does it, then it's tougher sell for you. So that's one of the other questions. Does the DOT get the results from those proceeds? The bottom line is if the DOT doesn't get any of that money, then your ability to get people interested is going to be pretty low. And this last one, somebody said, why do you even have the 4th one? Doesn't the 3rd one cover it? And I said, no, not if I'm the fleet manager, it doesn't cover it. It's great if the DOT gets that money back, but I want to get it back. I'm the fleet manager. I want it to go back to my fleet program. If it doesn't come back to my fleet program, I'm not going to get too excited about it either. So in some cases, we got some states where the money comes back to the general fund for the DOT, but not to the fleet. I think that's a problem, or I think that's wrong. They ought to make this program so you guys you have a dog in the fight. That's my favorite expression. You got a dog in the fight. You got a reason to want to try to improve your resale of your equipment because you can recover that money back into your fleet, and that motivates you to try to do these things. So with that being said, that is the end of my presentation and discussion. As I said, this one will be out in a couple of months. I think we're pretty proud of this project. We think it would be pretty simple to implement, and we think there's a lot of potential there for it. Is there any other questions about that before I wrap it up? Anything? All right, I do want to say this here, only because I can do this in 1 minute. Here's the discussion I was talking about earlier. You got the EMTSP program, which is why which is funding where you guys are here today. You got the equipment twig, which is a subset of folks that works with AASHTO, and then you got TRB committee, AQR 30, that helps the practitioners meet you folks. So I'm putting a pitch in for you. I would hope you'd consider getting involved in the TRB committee. I've been working in this thing for over 20 years. I found it be a lot really interesting. So with that, I'm done. I appreciate you folks' time. I'm sorry, but you're going to have to listen to me again on Wednesday. But maybe I'll try to learn a few jokes between now and then. So anything? Thank you.